Hi, Lynn. Hi, Vicki. Jency and Lynn, I've made you co-hosts, so you now have access.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Hey, success.
How are you feeling today?
About the same as yesterday. Not great, but got to keep moving. I was freaking out this morning trying to figure out how to get on Zoom after all our discussion, but thankfully you helped me out and it wasn't as difficult as I thought.
Yeah, I had to end up uninstalling and reinstalling it because I told it not to do video. Wouldn't turn it back on.
Yeah, I had to update mine a few days ago because I got totally blown out of a farmer's market board meeting last week, and I'm like, so I just updated everything.
Hi guys, it's Kate.
Hi, Kate.
Okay.
Hi there. Hi. I'm just gonna go on mute again.
Okay, I'm gonna name you so we know who you are.
Okay.
Ooh, Angie.
Okay, Angie, I've now enabled your co-host feature, so you can you'll have more access. Typically, it'll be down either in the security or the participant toolbar down at the bottom.
I'm assuming you're talking to me, but my audio didn't work when you started, so I missed
Oh,
a couple words. I'm sorry.
yes, I made you. You're now enabled as co-host, and so any of those special functions are down in the toolbar for you.
Okay, thank you. Good to see some of your faces.
You too.
Hi, Leroy. Hi, Lynn. How you guys doing?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm growing a beard.
Nice.
I'm gonna
Looks
try to,
good.
that is.
Does look good. I'm deciding to embrace the gray. The next time we're all together, I may be completely gray. You okay with that?
Definitely cheaper
Life
that
goes
way.
on.
Yeah, it is going to be a lot cheaper. My hair's gotten really long. It's interesting. Got missed 3 haircuts, and you've got a completely different different look.
My husband grew a beard, but he said wearing a mask, it was just too hot, and he just
Hot,
shaved it
yeah.
off.
Oh,
I loved it. I loved his beard, but maybe in the fall I'll see it again.
There you go. So
Yeah.
Kelly, my screen says I have speaker view on the top right. I'm not sure I'm seeing all of the bells and whistles that you.
If you like hover down where the toolbar is, that's where you'll see participants and security.
Oh, thank you.
And
Yep.
that's where you'll have the additional features.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And just so everybody knows, we're not recording yet, but we are live streaming now on the website and on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I look weird, it's because I have a virtual background.
I haven't learned how to do that yet, but
It's
I've
really, really easy.
Okay.
You have to create an account first.
Usually if you go down to the video function, oh, hi, you see Mike's figured it out. He's in paradise right now.
Yeah, yeah. I have my Mai Tai here, you know, I'm
I
getting the
love
sunburn, you know.
I like that the wind is even blowing in your
Like
photo.
the
And the
waves.
waves are crashing.
I don't have to worry about it blowing my hair out of shape though. How is everybody?
Good, how are you?
Good, good.
Thinking I might need to adopt your backdrop just for my peace of mind and sanity. You know, like
Yeah.
you
No,
look like
honestly,
you're
it's-
on vacation.
It's marvelous. You can also put other things on here like, oh, let's see here. I have some pictures of the ranch.
Oh, the
Yeah.
ranch.
Here's Kai Valley.
Love
Here's
it.
up to the pond. Here's up to one of the gorges, you know. Nice sunset. But this one is definitely the Mai Tai one.
All you need to add is the scent of coconut or pine needles or something
Yes.
like that.
Some aromatherapy.
Well, natural habit. Right? About San Francisco. I think we got frozen here.
I think you froze, Mike. Now he's at the Golden Gate Bridge though.
Do the backdrops add to your to the buffering need on, like, if you have
No.
limited Wi-Fi or limited bandwidth of any kind, would that mess up your transmission?
I don't know. That's a good question. Oh, Mike, you're on mute.
I'll stop horsing around. I think I caused myself to freeze and knock myself out.
I'm going to go ahead and start the recording. I think we're waiting on Marcus. I think that's it, right?
Is Russ joining us?
Oh, Russ. Yes, Russ, of course. He should be joining us. I met with him yesterday.
Just a question. Do we do roll call on Zoom? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we
think
did
need to.
previously.
Okay.
And I'm prepared with a list of with the roster if you need me to call it out. I'm not sure if Jency's also standing by with the same thing.
Yeah, all the hosts have been sent the roster with the speaker list. We may have some folks joining, in which case, because we've got a live link on the website now, in which case we'll just invite them to type their name and their address into the chat, and then we'll call them as they have entered their name. Because that way we can have it easily for the record. Hi, Marcus.
Hello.
Marcus, I was getting a bounce back from your personal email. So at some point in time, we might want to update that. I usually try to hit both of them for you guys, just because I'll make sure you are up to date.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll send you my updated email. I think it might be my former work email address.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So while we're waiting, has everybody been keeping 10 feet apart and staying in their your holes, and you so to speak. And does everybody have their mask that they're wearing? You know,
Yes,
Yes.
I mean, it's
definitely.
definitely a social change. It really is, but we have to get into the habit of doing that. You know.
So Kelly, do you need me to do any of the recording on my computer?
No, all you'll need to do is take notes.
Okay, thank you.
I think for saving bandwidth, I'm going to turn my video off. Actually.
Can you guys hear me? It's Russ.
Yes.
Hey, Russ.
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, great. There was a different link and I'm in a different Google meeting, which I will now terminate.
That may have been the original Google Hangouts Meet invitation we used to book your guys' calendars before the notice went out.
It was, yes.
Chair, I believe you have all of the participants.
Okay. Thank you. Well, it's 3 o'clock, so we will call the meeting to order of the Wasco County 2040 Citizens Advisory Group. Welcome to commissioners, staff, and public to our meeting. And we appreciate your patience as we continue to learn a new way of hosting meetings in response to governor's orders related to COVID-19. Oregon Revised Statutes 192.640 and 192.670 allow for public bodies to hold meetings via means of phone or electronic communication. To ensure for public safety but increase participation, Wasco County has elected to hold all public meetings for the near term via video conferencing. Staff has prepared a public presentation guide that was emailed to all registered participants on how to use the Zoom software. It is also available for download or view on Wasco County Planning Commission page. We are also live streaming this via YouTube and on the Wasco County website. At this time, I would like to have a roll call vote, or roll call, I'm sorry, of planning commissioners or citizen advisory group members.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Vicki Ashley. I see your name.
You have to unmute, Vicki.
I don't see that she's on mute, but I do see her name. I'll circle back. Russ Hargrave.
Here.
Brad DeHart. He called in previously. He unfortunately couldn't make it this afternoon. Lynn McIntyre.
Here.
Mike Davis.
Here.
Kate Willis.
Here.
Leroy Booth.
Here.
Marcus Swift.
Here.
Thank you. And Chris Chano also said that he was not able to attend today's unexcused absence.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I'll need to go over some rules for the meeting. For everyone, the meeting is being recorded and will be publicly available. All participants must mute themselves unless they are speaking. Lines that are providing feedback while not speaking will be muted by staff to ensure other people can hear. Only you can unmute yourself using the mic icon in the lower left corner. If you are participating by phone, unmute yourself by dialing *6. Participants behaving inappropriately will be promptly removed from the meeting. The chair will specifically invite participants for public comment at the appropriate time, so please be patient and wait to be called on. Please refrain from using the chat reactions, or hand-raising feature unless directed by the chair. It will distract from the intended flow of the meeting. When asked to comment, please state your name and address clearly for the record. For our Citizens Advisory Group members, please don't interrupt presentations. Write down your questions for discussion until after the presentations are finished. You need to be recognized by myself or the vice chair before speaking. Stay on the agenda and reserve non-agenda items for the parking lot for future discussion. Consensus means majority. Items that have reached consensus can be recommended to the Planning Commission for a formal vote. Meetings should conclude by determining any action items and setting an agenda for subsequent meetings. At this time, I'd like to ask if there are any additions or corrections to the minutes of October 1st or March 3rd. Does anyone have any additions or corrections? If not, could I have a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes as stated.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. Motion carried. Minutes are approved. I guess at this time, if there are any, if there's any public comment that is not related to anything on our agenda, we need to, does anyone have anything that is present that is not related to these agenda items? Okay,
Question.
yes.
Should we be appointing the alternates if we don't have, if the board isn't in commission isn't full as voters?
For the Citizens Advisory Group, you're all voting members.
Copy.
Okay. At this time, let's move to the staff presentation for introduction, goal exceptions, and plan revision. Kelly, can you?
Thank you, Chair.
There?
So as Lynn mentioned, we're going to focus on the first item on our agenda, which is you heard the other items on our agenda in March. So this is all new content for you. It's 3 chapters, including chapter 15, which is the plan revisions process. That's the criteria that we've used last date to date to update the comprehensive plan. We have the chapter 16, which is the goal exceptions chapter. And we also have a pretty extensive introduction chapter. We think we'll breeze through these pretty quickly. So it's likely we'll be able to revisit those items from the March work session. I'm going to start with chapter 15, the plan revisions process, just because most of this language comes directly from state law. So we didn't modify that language. We've used it throughout the Wasco County 2040 process and have not identified any problems with the criteria. You'll be familiar with that language from any staff reports during periodic review or any of the additional updates. It was previously chapter 11. We've moved it to the end after all the goal chapters. We've put it in that new format that you're all familiar with now. In chapter 11, it started with some definitions for urban areas and things. We thought that was a little confusing the way it was organized. So what we've done is move that to the sidebar adjacent to the overview. And of course, in the new format, renumbered the criteria and added those findings, which are now appearing as endnotes. So again, the purpose for this chapter is it's the criteria that we use in staff reports to make any updates to the comprehensive plan. And again, that comes directly from state law. So not a lot of wiggle room to make any additional edits there. The next chapter for your review tonight is chapter 16, which is the goal exceptions chapter. Again, this material was already present in the comprehensive plan. It had to undergo some significant revisions, and I'll get into that a little bit, but I thought it would be helpful for context for any of the members of the public listening, and just as a refresher to the Citizens Advisory Group to briefly cover what a goal exception is when I say that, because I know that can be a little jargony. So anytime you have in a county jurisdiction a resource property, so a farm or forest zoned property, and there's an interest in rezoning that to a non-resource property, so they want to go from farm to rural residential, or they want to go from forest to industrial, they have to meet the criteria in state law that's called a goal exception. And what that references is the statewide land use planning goals, specifically goals 3, so for agricultural lands, or goal 4 for forest lands. And sometimes we may see some additional exceptions, goal 14, urbanization. So if we need some additional infrastructure, we may have a goal exception for 14. We may see some additional exceptions, but typically it's for exceptions to 3 and 4. And there are 3 main processes allowed in state law for you to qualify for a goal exception. So it's irrevocably committed, which means basically this land's been used for, say, residential or industrial for decades. There's no way it can be converted back to resource use, so it's committed. There's also a physically developed, which is sort of similar to irrevocably committed, has some different criteria. And then there's what's called a reasons exception. We would typically see a reasons exception with things like commercial energy projects, but that means that this piece of land is so unique, and so it's really the only land available for the proposed use that they may qualify for an exception. But when we talk to citizens about the level of difficulty for rezoning rural lands, it's really because of this goal exception process. The criteria, the bar is really very high. And so in Wasco County, when we underwent the original comprehensive plan in 1983, we went through a pretty extensive process. It was a 2-step process, including a window survey and then a evaluation and analytics of tax assessment records to determine what lands were already committed. And so the bulk of what you're seeing in there are committed. They were granted a committed lands exception, either from goal 3 or goal 4. And that includes things like a whole bunch of subdivisions that existed for decades prior to 83. Also, all of our rural service centers, our rural service areas, so areas like Tye Valley, Wamak, Pine Grove. And then some unique properties like the Mid-Columbia grain growers, industrial property just outside of Antelope as one example. We've since 83 had some additional properties come meet the criteria for a goal exception, and those things, some of them were captured into the comprehensive plan, some for whatever reason weren't. So what we did was really try to bring that up to date. This chapter was previously chapter 13, and it's kind of extended into another chapter. So in bringing it into the new format, really tried to marry things. The other difficulty was that when we adopted in 1983 these committed lands, we of course didn't have the national scenic area. So things were sort of mixed in those tables and charts. And if you were not a person who spent a lot of time in Wasco County or really understood the difference between Wasco County and the national scenic area, you could be pretty confused by that. So what we did was went ahead and separated the Wasco County from the National Scenic Area lands and made sure that that was very clear. And I want to explain that we spent some time consulting with our regional rep who's here tonight, Scott Edelman, and others at the Department of Land Conservation and Development about whether or not to preserve those National Scenic Area committed exceptions in the comp plan. And we kind of determined that if anything were to happen to the National Scenic Area, it was in the best interest of Wasco County to preserve those exceptions moving forward. And why it needs to live in the comp plan is state law actually says an exception isn't actualized. It's not official until it's actually adopted in the comp plan. So the comp plan is really that inventory of lands that are non-resource. We also found that because we'd had minor updates over the years of the comp plan, that the way the information was presented was inconsistent and not in keeping with the requirements of state law. So I spent a tremendous amount of time doing research, digging through historical documents and really trying to ascertain where we could find findings, where we could find the original information, and why the exception was granted in the case of a lot of these properties. And then I worked extensively with the Geographic Information Systems, GIS department at Wasco County to update all those maps so that they're all very clean, they're easy to read, and they're similar in the other types of maps that you'll see in other documents with Wasco County and consistent with our online mapping system. And I just want to pause and give a shout out. I don't know if I've mentioned it much over the years, but our GIS team at Wasco County has been absolutely the unsung heroes of Wasco County 2040. They have done a tremendous amount of work and partnered to help us with analytics, pulling together mailing lists, doing a lot of this research. So I want to celebrate that work for sure. As I mentioned, the committed lands inventory or the goal exception inventory living in the comp plan, it's required by state law. And typically we would use this for research, for development applications. Folks may use this for other research purposes. It's really generally a research and an inventory. So it's not something that's actively used for permitting, but it is valuable information to have. And so that's why you see the updated format, and that's why we spent such a huge amount of time on that. So just to point out what it looks like now, we have, this is an example using Walter's Corner. So we had maps made with consistent colors, and we also in some cases had updated parcels. Made sure tax lots changed at some point in time, so we wanted to make sure we had those updated tax lots. So anytime anybody wanted to research this, they would be able to easily find this on our current GIS system. One of the requirements is really to understand how these exceptions were approved. So we made sure the date and the method of approval was indicated. Also, I think it's of interest and value to include the current and the past zoning. So we've included that. And then again, a brief description, sort of summarizing the reason for the exception. So the final thing I wanted to talk to you tonight is one of the biggest chapters. It's the introduction chapter. And this really is a labor of love and tells the story about how important it's been to the department and also to this body to really make our comprehensive plan a living, breathing, usable document for everybody, for planning staff, for citizens, for partners. And so what we've done is pull together not only some information that was in the existing comprehensive plan, but also all kinds of other information that's really useful for things like development applications or grant reporting, and also tells the story about this process that we've undergone that we think should be celebrated. So what you'll find in that introduction chapter is, of course, an overview that's consistent with the rest of the comprehensive plan. I also did an extensive amount of research on the history of planning in Wasco County and the Wasco County zoning, which I hope you find as fascinating as I did. It really tells a story about a community that has been dedicated to smart growth and development and land use planning for decades. Sometimes people are interested in what the legal framework is for the Oregon state system or the legal framework that we use in making decisions in Wasco County. So we provided some information for folks on the legal framework. Our comp plan, as you know, is really built around the statewide land use planning goals that apply to Wasco County. So we've given an overview in this section. Provided components of the comprehensive plan. So, you know, what you can expect to find in the document, what the process was to develop it. Probably the most critical, how to use this plan. So if you were somebody who didn't know anything about land use planning and picked up this document, this should give you a really good idea, a really good sense of what is in the comprehensive plan and how to go about using it. It's also important, you know, not just for citizens, but for planners of the future to understand how to go about making future updates, what is involved in revising our maps that we use and any of those inventories, mostly Goal 5 inventories. So we've included that. And then we have some definitions for map classifications. We also now, you should all be familiar with the fact that the maps that we use, our comprehensive plan map and our zoning map is all lives in our GIS database system that we have available to the public online. It was not, for whatever reason, clear that that was adopted by reference in the past comprehensive plan. We really shifted over in the late 90s when our GIS coordinator came on board. But we wanted to make sure that that was clear moving forward. And we've included adoption dates for all of those maps. So all of those environmental protection districts, if folks are interested when they came into play, we do get that question on the occasion. And also any revisions that have happened to those maps, because we know that can be interesting and useful information. Finally, we've included values and vision. So really, what's been the vision of the community? What are the values that people have expressed to us over time? And then finally, definitions. So planners can be very jargony, and we wanted to make sure that it was easy to find the information and understand the information presented here. So that is it for this presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that the Citizen Advisory Group members have. I'm going to go ahead and end my share screen here on this.
Kelly, this is Kate.
Yes.
Excellent job. The introduction is really interesting and brings everything forward and pulls it together for a comprehensive view. So thank you and good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I had a comment. I found the introduction fascinating. I really, as a longtime resident and planning to stay here forever, am interested in how we got here. And I do think it's important to be able to understand that, to plot the course where we want to go. So overall, it's a fantastic piece of work. And I think this document is much more useful and readable, obviously. So I don't have any complaints with the document, but one of the policies around Goal 4, which is not to implement the template test, I just wanted to understand the background of that decision a little more.
Are we going to discuss that later? And
I do have a presentation about the Work Task 18 chapters 4 and 8, so we can get into that at that point in time.
Okay, that's fine. Great. No, this is super document. No other comments on it then.
anyone else have any comments or questions about chapter 15, 16 or intro?
I have a grammar on the intro. I think it was page 10. There's, let me find it again right here. It states there's an INS in, and I think it should be in. It's above section 1E, 3 paragraphs up. I don't know how to share or show or anything.
Leroy, if it's okay, can you look on the bottom right-hand side of the page you're on and just tell us what packet page number you're looking at?
CAG page 3, or 6, I mean.
Okay, thank you.
5 of 13. Because when I was reading it, I forgot to mention this the other day, Kelly, that I think there's a grammar in it. It says decisions ins a simple, and I think it should be decisions in a simple. The paragraph starts with any
Yes, yeah,
modification.
I see that. Yeah, I think you're correct. I will, I'll verify that and then update that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, if not, we'll move on to staff presentation on work task 18.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen again here. Okay, so as you'll remember, we discussed this at the March, well, maybe you won't remember, it's been a while, but we discussed this at the March Citizen Advisory Group meeting. And we did go back and make some edits based on the feedback that we received from the Citizen Advisory Group. It was mostly pertaining to the destination resort eligibility map, but we also tightened up some of the language in the staff report and received some additional feedback from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife about some of the references used in the chapter. So some of that is updated. So first I'm going to tackle the work task 18, which is our sensitive wildlife maps related to goal 5, and then talk about goals 4 and 8. So work task 18 is our last official work task of our work plan for periodic review. And it involves sensitive wildlife habitat. When we were part of the periodic review, just as a refresher, part of the periodic review process is to solicit public feedback. So that's why we did those 7 road shows in 2017. And also stakeholder feedback. So feedback from public agencies and other entities that we regularly engage with, and ask them for their opinions or their needs as far as the comprehensive plan. And at that time, we sat down with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they informed us that our maps were out of date and out of sync with the maps that they use to actually advise land use planning development permits in Wasco County. Specifically, EPD 8, Environmental Protection District 8, which is for sensitive wildlife. It's for big game, deer and elk. And EPD 12, which is our sensitive bird species. And that consists of things like raptors and owls. In conjunction with that, we had some tweaks to the policies and implementation strategies. And then based on our analysis and our conversations with ODF&W, thought it was appropriate to also simultaneously update the land use and development ordinance update for EPD 8 to assure a seamless transition and also offset some of the potential issues as a result of changing the maps. So as you can see, the proposed map basically matches the map that Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife uses in their COMPASS program. I put these side by side, so the proposed map, and then this is a screenshot of what is available through the COMPASS online map that ODF&W uses. We've had some comments and some concerns about what the actual impacts would be, and we've tried to message this in a couple different ways, but I wanted to try again with another technique to really make it clear what the net result of these changes are, because I understand the map is very scary. It seems like the whole of Wasco County is now covered by this overlay zone, and that can feel a little frightening. So I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about what this means. First, we do have a portion of the county that has been in this EPD for decades. And one of the things that we did is work strategically with ODF and W to really trim the fat, streamline these rules, and make them effective and efficient for not only private property, but also for protecting the species. So really the net result of these proposed changes for those who were already in EPD 8 is a lessening of restrictions. So we've added, based on the EC, the environmental, social, economic, and energy consequences work that we did in conjunction with public and stakeholder feedback, and also consultation with ODF and W and the Department of Land Conservation and Development, we were able to add exemptions for uses, particularly for all those agricultural uses that I know folks were really, really concerned about. So we didn't have these exempt uses in the past. This is brand new. So now all those residents that were previously in this overlay zone, if they're applying for farm use or farm dwellings, they're actually going to be exempt from this rule. We've also worked with ODF and W based on our EC analysis to remove those voluntary siting standards, which were an additional layer of rules and regulations. They were voluntary, but it still added in a step to a permitting process. So we've gone ahead and removed those. Fencing standards were something that members of the public in particular found objectionable and difficult to understand. And so again, we've negotiated to remove those fencing standards. And we also had in the end of that ordinance language, some additional notification requirements that were redundant to other things that we do in our process. So we've gone ahead and removed those. So the net result for those who are already in this EPD is actually less restrictions and hopefully more opportunities for exemption. So we do have some areas, portions of the county that will be new to this overlay zone. And there are some reasons for that, but it is basically that ODF and W updated their maps in 2012, I believe, and decided that they were seeing enough kinds of uses outside of agricultural uses that were impacting species. And so they needed to essentially expand the reach of this overlay zone. I want to give an example of this because I think it's confusing to folks on how ODF uses their map versus how we use our map. So we have EPD 8, Environmental Protection District for deer and elk. And we would typically have this available to the public, and anybody interested in a development project would be able to access online or talking to a planner. But anytime you're interested in doing any type of conditional use permit anywhere in Wasco County, we have a list of criteria that planners and the applicants have to address. And one of those is whether the proposed use impacts sensitive wildlife. So anytime a conditional use permit is submitted to Wasco County, it triggers a review by ODF and W. ODF and W, in making that review and recommending strategies for mitigation, uses their map. So they use the Compass map. And so how this has functioned has been kind of problematic. The best example that ODF has kind of used in the past to illustrate this has been with some of our commercial energy projects down in South County. So you remember last year we had two big, a solar and a wind project. And one of those developers had some initial consultations with the county and saw EPD 8 and didn't really follow up with a planner, but assumed because these lands weren't in EPD 8 that they weren't going to have any conflict with deer and elk winter range. And when that got triggered through the conditional use permit and ODF&W suddenly had a review, it was very confusing and frustrating for the developer. So really the goal of this update is to clarify and eliminate that frustration, because it just feels very frustrating and disingenuous for us to have a map that isn't consistent with what our partner ODF&W uses. So really, this first point is we want to make clear to everybody in Wasco County what areas ODF&W actually considers sensitive for protection of deer and elk. The net result for those property owners coming into this is for those basic uses, the things permitted outright, the things permitted with a limited review. So again, agricultural uses, farm dwellings, they're exempt. Also, you're exempt if you're in a rural service area. So if you're in Ty Valley, if you're in Wamak, where they may see, they're likely to see an impact is for those different uses, the elevated uses. So type 2 uses are things like partitions, wineries, utility facilities. It's kind of a short list of things that are unusual for the zone. They're things we don't see that often. And those types of uses, this will be an additional review. So it will cost an additional fee. It will take some additional time. And I'm going to explain in the next slide sort of what a review consists of. But for the conditional uses, so that's the mining, the commercial energy facilities, non-farm dwellings. Again, be clear, these are already, because of conditional use criteria, reviewed by ODF&W. The addition is going to be that staff review. So there is an additional fee attached because it takes staff additional time to write findings and do the analysis based on what ODF&W comes back with. So what generally happens with a review based on experience, based on consultation with ODF&W is they may recommend modifications like moving the site. They may say, so one of the provisions in the ordinance is if you put in a new dwelling, so like a non-farm dwelling, you need to be 30 feet from the roadway, from the main road or access point. And that's, ODF&W uses this concept called clustering development. So basically they want to see development happening where it's already been happening. And that's to give safe passage to deer and elk in lands that have been previously untouched. So that may be a strategy that comes out. Yeah, I think it's important to also reiterate in this ordinance language, there are options for variances from those standards. Like if you can say, well, I've seen the deer and elk coming within 300 feet, and actually maybe 500 feet is better. There is that opportunity to have that conversation with ODF&W, and they do a site visit and a site review at the time of development. ODF&W may recommend some mitigation measures as well. They may recommend fencing. They may recommend different kinds of lighting. They may have some strategies to not only protect species but also to safeguard the type of development that's occurring. So they may come back with some basically conditions of approval. As I mentioned, staff review is really, we're taking that information developed from ODF&W and we're making findings and then potentially conditions of approval to really explain and demonstrate how those mitigation measures are really going to safeguard adverse impacts to wildlife. And that's why it takes some additional time and some additional money, because it is a lot more work for staff members. EPD 12 is for the sensitive birds, and this map we're updating with some new sites and also removing non-viable sites. And this is based on extensive studies that ODF&W and others have conducted over since 2005 when we originally adopted this map. ODF&W requires that we keep this map confidential. It's available to landowners at the time of application, and we have some rules around that. But I just want to reiterate that we did send individual notices to any property owners who were coming in, as well as those who are being removed. And that was in addition to the postcard notice that we sent out. And we haven't to date heard any feedback from any folks within the CPD. This is another one of those EPDs where if you want development to occur within the buffer, so it basically draws a buffer around the nesting site, like a circle. And if you're proposing development to occur within that buffer, within that circle, then ODF&W is going to have some mitigation measures. Typically, they've told me that this would be like, you can't build from February to June, because that's when the birds are nesting and, you know, taking care of their young. Or it may be you need to mitigate the dust from construction or mitigate the noise during certain hours. But generally, I do want to say that another thing ODF&W has explained to us, because they're the experts, is that most of these places where birds are nesting are topographically constrained anyway. So they're not places that are likely to see development. They're on ridges. They're really close to riparian areas. They're places that for other reasons aren't viable for development. So we're not anticipating, we haven't heard a lot of feedback that folks are concerned about this, but there is the potential for some back and forth with ODF&W. And again, it's not a you can't do any development. It's not taking away the right for development. Again, it's just a mitigation process. So there's a little bit of give and take for any applications. So I went over this a little bit before, but I want to reiterate because we've had some comments and some concerns about why we're doing this. And because we opted as a county to enter a periodic review to update our comprehensive plan. And if you remember back in 2016, we had lots of conversations about periodic review versus post-acknowledgement plan amendment. The periodic review actually triggers some of these rules for us. And I've listed them here. Oregon Administrative Rules 660-023 is the division for Goal 5. So that's where all of our Goal 5 rules live. And I basically, to summarize what's on this sheet, it says, if you go into periodic review, you have to reach out to your wildlife partners, and you have to see if there's been any changes. And if they say, yep, the inventories are different, there's been changes, we have to go through that process of doing these updates. And we don't get to control the data, the inventories. We're not wildlife experts. We're not biologists. We really have to rely, and we're statutorily required to rely on Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We then have to go through that ESEE analysis process, which was part of our roadshow. So we asked the public, hey, look at all these uses, potential uses, and tell us what you think the consequences are of restricting. Tell us what you think the conflicts are. And we really developed that analysis, which lives in the appendix of the proposed Chapter 5, to, again, negotiate with ODF&W to create those exemptions and to remove some of the fencing standards and other standards that we're seeing particularly onerous and unnecessary. This is a lot of information. This basically just summarizes where the policy changes have made. What we really tried to do is, again, make everything that we're doing very clear and transparent, and tied in those EC analysis conclusions, so exempting farm uses, removing siting standards, into the action items. As I mentioned, it's a little bit unique for us to jump the gun in our land use and development ordinance update, but it was a priority for staff and also the citizen advisory group to make sure that we weren't having any unintended consequences as a result of this map update. And that's why we were able to go ahead and do this LUDO update just for this section. And that, again, includes adding exempt uses. So anything that is a permitted outright or a type 1 use is going to be exempt. Anything related to agricultural activity, including farm dwellings, is exempt. there was some confusing language about permitted uses and conditional uses that we've gone ahead and removed those fencing standards, and modified some of the siting standards for clarity. Including making sure that folks know there's a trigger in conditional use criteria. So goal 4 and 8 were things when we developed our work plan. The state asks us to talk to people and see what priorities are, and then we go through a process with state staff of negotiating that work plan. And our original work plan, I think, included all chapters and all goals for the comprehensive plan. And we were told by Department of Land Conservation and Development at that point in time that we were being entirely too ambitious. So we removed those items. And these weren't, to be frank, they weren't priorities. Forest lands and recreation were not priorities. We did hear some feedback, which we've incorporated, but they didn't rise to the level of necessity for all the other, I think the final count's like 17 updates that we did. But we wanted to make sure, again, that we have a comprehensive update to the comprehensive plan. So we've tagged these on to the end of the process, like we've done with some of our other chapters in the past, to make them consistent with other goals and policies, and also really honor the feedback that we heard from the public and from stakeholders. With forest lands, I know Russ has some feedback about some questions about some of the existing policies, but really the bulk of what we heard from residents and those interested in forest lands in Wasco County were twofold. One, a lot of concerns about water and the impact of additional residential development would have on the water table. I don't think it's a secret that a lot of our forest lands above Mosier experience some pretty serious water quantity issues. And so folks we're very concerned that if we add to residential development, that will further deplete the aquifers. Also, top of mind for folks all over the county, but specifically for forest lands, was wildfire risk. And that's not surprising given our tragic summer last summer. And it's also such a great time to do these updates because we have some real subject experts on the staff who are very passionate about natural hazards, including Senior Planner Will Smith, who, if you'll remember, was successful with a grant for the Community Planning Assistance for Wildfires that we completed, I think, 2018. And that's where we invited economists and foresters to come model a forest wildland fire risk in Wasco County, and really give us a clear picture of some mitigation strategies using the land use planning system to help reduce risk and ultimately property damage and life safety issues. So we really took the opportunity to focus on making sure Goal 4 honored the work that's been done with CPAW and that we're looking forward to doing in the near future with the Community Welfare Protection Plan. So those edits, again, just really designed to be consistent with that. And then, of course, we updated the format, and you'll see some slight revisions to the format that you may be used to. We expanded where the policies are and got rid of some of those sidebars to make it a little bit easier to read. And then we moved the findings from where they were by the references to an endnote because we thought it was a little more intuitive for folks to be see directly what the findings corresponded to in the text. So recreation, when we think about recreation, we typically think about recreation planning, parks and activities. In Wasco County, we do have 2 park districts that handle most of the recreation planning. But a lot of the feedback that we heard early on and then throughout the process was primarily about the conflicts that arise between recreators and visitors and commercial agriculture in Wasco County. So This typically manifests in conflicts on the roadways. So like bicyclists or other recreators, and during harvest season when our farmers are moving combine or tractor and around blind corners and other areas. And those are big, heavy pieces of machinery that do not stop quickly. And farmers are genuinely concerned that they could have very serious or fatal accidents with folks just not aware of harvest. And there was also, a lot of conversations about folks who don't know anything about rural living, sort of parking on private property, making their own restroom on private property. And so generally being a nuisance. So while we don't have the ability to regulate what happens on multimodal transportation roadways, what we were really interested in doing, because it's something we heard a lot throughout the process, was increasing opportunities for outreach and engagement, not just with tourists and visitors, but also with farmers. So anytime we have special events on our roadways, like, Cycle Oregon's a prime example, or we seasonally typically have road rallies, making sure that farmers get an advance notice and feel in the loop so that they can adjust their schedules accordingly. And then similarly, we've got current planning staff working on a handout that we can share with our local tourist organizations and others on when our harvest seasons are, which bicycle routes and other routes may be unsafe during those times, and alternative routes for folks to pursue, as well as places to park and places to use the restrooms. So we really tried to weave that into this chapter and develop some policies to help continue those efforts and really respect and try to create some solutions for a very real problem that folks are experiencing on the landscape of Wasco County. And then probably the most exciting update for Chapter 8 is really this destination resort map, eligibility map. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because again, we've received some comments that indicate that there's been a little bit of confusion with messaging. So I want to try a different way to message that and talk about that. So we looked at this map in March, and we had some citizens come to the meeting. We also heard this feedback in the roadshows, that we had 2 locations up in the sort of along Tie Ridge and then up in Petersburg. And property owners and residents just said, this doesn't make sense to us. We don't think a development would ever make sense here because of fire risk, because of conflicts with commercial ag. So we are requesting that you remove these sites from this eligibility map. And just as a refresher, the Citizens Advisory Group decided at that time to direct staff to remove those items from the map. And so we've done that. And essentially what we're left with is 2 potential locations in Wasco County, one kind of near Pine Grove, around Walters Corner, kind of Juniper Flat area, and then around the Washington Family Ranch, Big Muddy, so where Young Life currently has a youth camp. So to be clear, why are we doing this map? Well, we get a lot of interest on folks wanting to develop destination resorts, and state law says we actually have to use the criteria that would permit destination resorts to happen, and we actually have to adopt it before we can even really have the conversation and entertain developers with proposals related to destination resorts. So what this eligibility map does is basically shows in black and white where, given those state law requirements, destinations could potentially be permitted in Wasco County. So what we're doing is essentially taking a lot of Wasco County out of the equation and saying, based on what state law says, we can only really do it in these 2 locations. And we typically, we need those tools. We need those tools, and we need them to be adopted to have meaningful conversations with applicants and really offer them the clarity, because otherwise it's just conjecture. And so it's useful as a tool. for development. It also, we heard a lot of feedback during Wasco County 2040, particularly from residents and property owners in South Wasco County, that they were needing more opportunities for economic development and just development in general, and asked us to think outside the box and throw at them any and all opportunities for economic development and property usage. And so really what this does, this eligibility map and the potential EPD does, is allows for a new use, a destination resort. To be really clear, what this map doesn't do, so it's, again, an eligibility map. What it doesn't do is permit a destination resort. So this is not a land use decision. This is not waving a wand and saying destination resort automatically approved. All it's saying is this is where it could happen in Wasco County. So again, doesn't waive the permitting process. We heard a lot of folks who were concerned that fire and roads and water resources hadn't commented on these issues. And that's not unusual, because typically those bodies really want an actual project, an actual development to respond to give meaningful feedback. So when it's theoretical, when it's a possibility, there's not really much to respond to. But if a development were to be proposed, we certainly would have a pre-application conference, and those stakeholders would be invited to submit comments about the proposed development for everything and anything related to water, roads, infrastructure, life safety issues. And I want to stress that those are absolute priorities for our department and for our county government. And we take that very, very seriously. So we're not looking at bypassing those processes. We're just trying to put them in the appropriate order. This also doesn't eliminate possibilities for future modifications. So were things to dramatically change and a new viable crop started cropping up in these areas, or some other types of use happen in the future, or other maps were to change, it doesn't mean we can't modify this map. It's really, again, an eligibility map. So I just want to stress this. Eligibility map doesn't mean it's a permit. If a property owner who happens to be in this future EPD wants to develop a destination resort, they have to go through a permitting process. And for a large destination resort, there's a huge amount of criteria that they have to meet, including millions of dollars worth of infrastructure improvements, dedicated housing units. They have to be near recreation sites. So it's a steep bar. It's not an easy thing to achieve, and it involves a significant amount of investment on the part of the developer. And then just to reiterate, at the time of permitting, that's really when it's appropriate to invite fire, water, and roads to participate. And just to be clear, any of these updates, any of these work tasks, we do have a periodic review assistance team that we send updates to, and they're invited. And that's a lot of it is state agencies. So it's people like ODF&W, it's the Aviation, Department of Aviation, it's ODOT. It's a huge list, and we invite them to participate and submit comments. So they do have the opportunity to submit comment at this point in time, and we haven't heard anything again, because I think it's because it's an eligibility map. So the next steps for this, if we decide to adopt this eligibility map, and the policies proposed in the comp plan really set us up, tee us up for the next steps with this. And I want to be clear about what the next steps are. If we adopt the map, the next step will be then to develop an environmental protection district, which would be number 15 for Wasco County, that has all those standards, criteria, and regulations, most that come out of state law. And we do that during our land use and development ordinance update that starts next year and should be about a 2-year process. That's a public process. The public is invited to look at that state criteria, to recommend additions. We can't take away from what's required in state law, but we can make additions, and we can make things more restrictive. So if folks are really concerned about fire, that would be the appropriate time to add in some additional requirements or provisions related to fire, for instance. And again, public process, lots of opportunities for comment. I wanted to touch on a couple other Goal 5 updates that were made, not related to the wildlife maps, just to make sure that it's really clear. We had a lot of conversations about this Historic Landmarks Commission, and we have it. The Planning Commission actually heard a Historic Landmarks case related to the Imperial Wind Project for that historic district. But we typically only hear a historic landmarks or historic property case, I think once a decade, if that. And so really we've used the Planning Commission as a proxy. But what in doing a deep dive of an analysis and listening to feedback from leadership, what we're really opting to do to streamline that process is allow the planning director to be the reviewing body. And typically the reviews consist of things like demolition or additions and modifications to historical sites. We don't have, most of the sites in Wasco County are cultural sites, they're archaeological sites. There are things like the Barlow Road, Oregon Trail, or we have some places where buildings used to be. So again, that's why we don't see this commonly. But when we've had a Historic Landmarks Commission in the past, it's just been very problematic to keep up because they so infrequently actually hear cases. So that's why we've opted to change that. We also got some feedback about some of the language related to aggregate mining, and so have just cleaned up some of that language as well to make it very clear which sites are significant on our inventory and which sites have been evaluated and haven't gone through an EC process. I mentioned these other edits that we made. So we moved the findings from where they were with the references and made them endnotes. And again, that's just for ease of use to make it clear what the findings actually correspond to in the text. And then remove that 2-column format to make the policies and implementations broader on the page. And we just think that's for readability, just much easier to read. So that's why we made those modifications. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that the Citizens Advisory Group has.
So is on the EDP, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You have a question, Leroy?
I had one, but there was someone else that was talking. I didn't want to interrupt them.
Sorry, Leroy, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. On the EDP or the recreation section, where they're talking about non-motorized versus motorized preferences or something like that, I have a problem with that, and I would like to have it removed out of the comp plan if possible. The reason being is when you're talking about non-motorized versus motorized, specifically when it comes to like e-bikes, there's some conflict between federal guidelines and state. Specifically, ODFW considers an e-bike to be a motorized vehicle, so it can't go where a normal bike would be able to go. If you go to BLM land or forest land, they consider an e-bike to be treated as a bicycle. And when you have conflicts like that, you're opening yourself up to problems with management. And I don't think it's appropriate in that respect. So I would like to, pulled from the comp plan. Now that's not going to eliminate the need to state goals, but I don't think it's something that we want in there. And based on the comments that I've seen and heard from people out there about restrictions as far as the use, that falls, I think that would fall into the area that they would prefer not to have restricted.
Kelly, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so what Leroy's referring to is implementation measure E under policy. Let me just mute it.
1.2.
Implementation 8.1.2, and it's E. And the policy reads, or the strategy reads, let's see. Consistent with goal 8, preference shall be given to non-motorized types of activities over motorized activities when developing recreation plans. And I want to make clear that this is taken directly from state law. This isn't something that we manufactured. And so we can certainly remove it from the comp plan, but it doesn't remove the requirement in state law. So, and we can take it out, but whenever we are making recreation plans, which again doesn't commonly happen in Wasco County, but anytime we're making recreation plans or providing advice or counsel to sort of North Wasco Parks and Rec or South Wasco Parks and Rec, we would still need to make these recommendations for preference of our non-motorized.
I had a couple questions. Are you done, Leroy?
Yes, at this point.
It's hard to read people's body language over Zoom. So a couple questions. I was also curious about motorized. Leroy, I think you need to mute. And Vicky, everyone who's not speaking should probably mute, and that will help to. So my question was, how would, I was assuming until Leroy asked this question that an electronic motor would be considered the same as any other kind of motor. But now I was going to ask, what were we thinking? Was an electronic motor going to be considered a non-motor, or how would we consider that?
We would look for guidance with state laws and our state advisors. Because again, this comes directly out of state law. This isn't something that we're manufacturing or creating.
Uh-huh. And do you know what their answer is? From what Leroy said, it sounds that may not be consistent.
You know, I would think we would have to contact state representatives directly and follow up. And I can certainly do that ahead of the Planning Commission hearing next month.
Okay. Another question I had, when you were going through the EPDs, and I wasn't able to identify the page, but at one point you were talking about the impact, and so it might have been EPD 8, you know, the sensitive wildlife. But you were saying that type 1 requests for ag would be exempt, that both the things can permitted outright as well as type 1 would be exempt. And I was just wondering, why not forest also?
It's based on the guidance that we received from the public and doing that EC analysis. So what the public identified as potential conflicts with wildlife, and then what ODF and W advised was a potential conflict. And I know for birds, for sensitive birds, both agricultural and forest practices are exempt. But there was some sense that some of the uses in forest lands under type 1 could potentially conflict with species. So it was born out of that analysis and feedback from ODF&W.
Yeah, I somehow thought that we were doing forest in a subsequent phase, and that this round was focused on agriculture, EFU, and that forest was in a subsequent phase. But it is all in this draft. Was that the original plan, or did I misunderstand the timing of the forest?
It's been on the agenda for us to look and update for us as sort of this in this last year. So 2020, it's always been the goal
Okay,
for us
so
to update goal 4.
the timing hasn't changed. Okay. Because I just want to make sure that the public that we are this day and have been representing had the same understanding of the timing, and so that whatever the comments are on forest, we've had the opportunity to hear them, and it sounds like we have. Another question I had, and I shared it with Kelly earlier, she referred to it, was around for goal 4. We're not using the template test, which is allowed by the state. There's and I guess my question fundamentally is just why? Because one thing we did hear from people a lot across the board was, please don't be more restrictive than we have to be. And our answer was, well, the state makes us do these things. And in this case, it's not the state, it's us. So I was wondering, why are we being more restrictive than the state requires?
As I mentioned early on in my presentation, forest lands and recreation were not priorities that were identified for the work plan by the members of the public or stakeholders. So really, we tried to limit our scope and limit our scope based on the advice of the Department of Land Conservation and Development to those things that were really a priority. We did ask the question about forest lands in 2017. And I want to be clear that we heard a lot of those less restrictive comments were predominantly from residents in the agricultural lands. What we've heard consistently from residents in the forest lands is concerns over water and concerns over wildfire. And I think I don't want to mischaracterize what we've heard, but with a few exceptions, the bulk of the feedback that we've heard from folks who live in the forest lands or adjacent to the forest lands is, please don't allow additional development because of the impacts to water and the increased risk for wildfire. So we did throw it out there. We threw everything out there in 2017 and said, what do you want us to focus on? Because it's not our priorities, it's community's priorities. We're really just the mechanism. We're really just the technical experts that can help weave our way through state law. And it really wasn't a priority for community members to evaluate this template test. And I understand we do have a few folks who live in the forest zones that would like to see opportunities for more development, but equally, and in fact, more of the feedback that we've heard is, please don't allow for additional residential development because of those risks to water and fire. That doesn't mean we can't revisit it in the future, but it really, again, was not a developed priority part of our work plan. We can only focus on what was in scope.
Kelly, can you talk about what the template test is? Some people are not.
Yes, of course.
That.
So forest lands, they're a resource zone in Oregon, and they have more limitations on potential residential development than agriculture, actually. And they have a couple mechanisms. One is the lot of record. So that's if your family owned property, the property prior to 1985. when the expectation would have been that you could have built a home on it. You could have applied for Measure 37 or Measure 49 claim. We also have large tract dwellings, which is if you own 270 consecutive acres contiguous acres, or 340 acres spread throughout the forest, and then you do some deed restrictions. And that's really to facilitate folks who are actually actively foresting. And it's a common practice in communities where you see more forestry activity. And then there's something called the template test. And that's gone through some significant revisions even recently to sort of address some problems with that rule, particularly how the template's designed. But basically, it is what it sounds like. There's a sort of a template that you would overlay in a forest property and say, within this template, is there a density of residential development already existing? And if it's already existing, it's kind of like, well, there's already residential, so then you're entitled to build a residential. That's a simplified explanation of what it is, but I think, and there's been a lot of refinement to like where you put the dot for the template, how you define what that looks like. But essentially what it means is, it's sort of a way to say, well, my neighbor's doing it, so I should be able to do it. And the problem with the template test has really been that then we see a sort of never-ending cycle of residential development. It just sort of inches its way throughout a forest zone and results in the whole forest zone eventually being populated by residences, or at least that's the fear that's expressed on the part of residents. So when we went through the transition land study area analysis, the TULSA, as it's referred to in the comp plan, we looked at a lot of these lands. We looked at a lot of these transitional lands, a lot of lands where development had already occurred. And we went through the process of rezoning a lot of properties from forest or farm to some of our RR properties or our FF, which was our it's a forest zone, but it's a non-resource zone. So its main goal is sort of to serve a transition between and residential and protect forest resources. One of the, I think, horse trades that was made at that point in time, or one of the decisions by the decision-making body, the governing body at that time, was if we go forward with the alternative, because the Tulsa had developed a series of alternative scenarios, you know, sort of figuring out which properties would go through this rezone. The decision was made at that time, if we're going to go with this more aggressive rezoning, then what we'd like to see in the future is for Wasco County to never implement the template test. And so that decision was made, I think, in 1997, that in the future, no template test would be applied in Wasco County. And again, we didn't hear feedback about this throughout this process. And so we've left it alone. We really left it alone. And I think there's a lot of frustration, I think, on the part of, again, a handful of forest property owners not really understanding, well, my property, you know, can't really grow trees. It doesn't make sense that it's a forest zone. But the forest land properties are actually, they have multiple purposes. They not only serve as a safeguard for forestry operations and forest activities, but we also have a lot of our watershed areas in the forest lands in Wasco County. So a lot of the F1, Leroy had asked, you know, why is F1 much more restricted than F2? Well, the bulk of, I think it's about 70% of F1 lands are actually publicly owned. And a lot of it contains some of our reservoirs and resources for water uses. So we're really trying to protect those resources from encroaching development that may impact some of our adjacent urban lands. Of course, we've got species concerns, we've got you know, habitat concerns, and then going back to that wildfire concern on the part of residents.
So I appreciate your response and the clarification on the different tests that are applicable. I just wanted to point out that, first of all, there is far more agricultural land in this county than forest land. And so while we heard a lot more issues around the agricultural land, that is probably consistent with the ratio of ag to forest. It doesn't mean it's more important to those people than the forest issues are to the forest people. It's just less forest people. And so that's why we heard less. The second thing I wanted to point out is one thing we did hear across the board, and certainly from forest people. I remember the gentleman who owns the judge's property up the road, and it's, I think, several thousand acres of F2. And he was one in Mosier on forest land that complained he'd never been able to break even on his forest land. I'm not advocating for development on forest land at all. I'm really questioning why the county has stepped in and made a restriction that's more than the state requires. Because one thing we heard is, please don't do that. Please don't be more restrictive than you need to be. We're doing it. And, you know, I was here when the Tulsa study was done and when those lands were rezoned. Good friend of Joe Betzing. It was a thing that happened. It's not a good basis for policy moving forward. And it certainly isn't a fair thing. You take a small handful of people that benefited from that decision and then want to adopt that as policy across a broad swath moving forward to the disadvantage of those who didn't benefit in that episode. I just don't think that's what people have been asking us to do. So, you know, you can disagree with me or we could debate it more. I'm not dug in on it, but it does strike me as being a little tone deaf regarding what we heard.
Can I?
Thank you, Russ. Other commissioners?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, Mike.
Thank you. I'll turn off my video just to save bandwidth. I'd like to echo a little bit about what Russ is mentioning, that one of the, of course, almost a mandate was how to not be more than restrictive of this, as this, what the state was. And I've heard that off and on through the earlier part of our discussions. And I would much rather keep it in that tone to allow, because we don't know what the future is going to bring. We really don't. I mean, nobody does. Nobody has a crystal ball here. But I do think that looking at the past conflicts is when we've had more restrictions, and rather than to just align ourselves with the state. So yes, there's people who want extreme restrictions, and totally understand that. But there's also a group that wants to open it up in certain areas, and I think that adding more restrictions to the state mandates is not a appropriate, or not, I wouldn't say appropriate, but I would say a good decision for the county. So I'm much more of an advocate of just align ourselves with the state and allow the verbiage to go forward like that.
Okay. Other comments?
I have one. So what Russ is saying, he says the template option. Kelly says that that's not an option, that it was decided before Mike is saying he wants to go with the state. So does that mean we want to allow the template now or not?
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if that was directed to me or Russ, but I'll just chime in and say, you know, the idea behind this is to really not restrict anything more than what the state has done, and to align ourselves with the state. Okay. Now, maybe Russ would have much more of a comment directly on the template. So I'm going to let Russ chime in on that one if he wants to.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Mike. No, I really don't. I mean, I'm not really, to me, where I'm coming from isn't really about the template. It's why are we being more restrictive than the state? And the area where we are, one area that significant is the template test. So that's my issue. It's not really around development per se. It's not really around the template per se. It's around, hey, we heard from everybody. Please don't be more restrictive than you have to be. And that's why I'm raising the issue.
I think what Kelly was saying is that the citizens from around the county, from all the meetings, were expressing a lot of concerns about allowing for much development in those forest lands due to wildfire and water concerns. And that is why that is not suggested at this time. Correct, Kelly?
That's correct.
This is Kate.
Yes, Kate.
Just thematically, because also in reading the comments that came in, and I know that there's a difference between if you're having a comment that's related to an issue that's specific to the person who's, the citizen who's making that comment, and it actually has to be dealt with in another body, not this body, not with the planning commission or the planning office. And I know that there were, correct, Kelly, there were some comments, and this is going to the tone deaf comment that you made earlier, and that was made earlier. And I'm just, Russ, so my overarching concern is not, it's about making sure that we're not tone deaf. If it's about water and fire, and we're hearing that clearly, being responsive to it, being responsive to the overly restrictive or not, is another issue. And then just separating out individual issues that need to go to other agencies. And I'm understanding that some of the comments we received were about that, but the overarching question for me is, are we being responsive to all the diverse perspectives that we're hearing about? Because we're hearing from South Wasco, we're hearing from folks around Mosier. I think we are, from what I'm hearing in terms of Kelly and the overarching themes that came through, and separating out individual issues that have to do with their own property and need to be dealt with in other agencies. Do you overarchingly, Russ or Mike, feel like this commission or this advisory group is being really excessively tone deaf? And if we are, then we really need to rethink that.
So, no, absolutely not. I think that we've spent a lot of energy and done a good job of reaching out, listening, documenting what we heard, playing it back, and changing our materials accordingly. We've had town hall meetings all across the county, and the results of that have made changes in our draft, and I think we've done a great job of it overall. So I'm absolutely not raising a systemic or overall issue. It's a point issue around, are we, in this case, we are being more restrictive than the state. I want to point that out because that is one thing I heard, please don't do. But in answer to your question, Kate, across the board, no, I think we've done a good job.
I mean, for the record, I do too. And I think for the record that I'd like to, just for the record, and please, and I'm asking for comments back, because I think there are instances where we may have citizens who have specific, they happen to have property, or they happen to have a point of view because they have property in a particular zone, and for the good of the zone, and given state law and given our mandate to follow, within the guidelines that we need to do, they may be disgruntled, or they may feel not heard, or like they're not getting relief. I know, Kelly, correct? They have been, if another agency needs to handle that particular issue, they've been referred to those agencies, right? I mean, we've tried to help them navigate.
Yes, that's correct. So just for clarity, what Kate's referring to are some of the comments that were added on as attachments. And you'll notice from some of the comments were not pertaining to the issues that we're talking about tonight. They were either related to specific issues on the property. Some were related to issues in the scenic area, or issues in the urban growth boundary of the Dalles. And in all of those cases, we've reached out to those individuals and given them the appropriate contacts to address their issues. So, whether it's the sort of issues about the pathways around Rock Creek Reservoir that we don't have jurisdiction over, we've pointed that gentleman to the correct folks. For the person concerned about the development within the UGB of the Dalles, we've forwarded those comments and directed that person to direct comments to the City of the Dalles staff. There's an individual who sent in a comment about their property that sort of straddles the scenic area, and we've had extensive meetings with that person. So in all of those cases, generally we try to just present comments as they come and not editorialize them, because that's the requirement. But when we've seen somebody who is maybe confused about what Wasco County 2040 is, or really needs that assistance and help to find what they're looking for, we've always tried to reach out and help them find the answers and get in touch with the appropriate people.
So thank you, Kelly. The only reason why I'm raising this is because being on the advisory group and being on the planning commission, I think about this a lot in terms of what our role is to represent our constituents in the areas in which we live, and to really hear them and to bring it to to the role that we play. I think we've done that. If we're missing anything, I think now is the time, and in continuing in this process is the time to make sure we're looking in the mirror. Are we doing our job? And are we separating out the issues that are not dealt with by this body, and the constraints within that we have to work within. And to me, that's kind of the North Star. So I think when we separate those out, and we look at the overarching issues about water and fire, and definitely I heard that too in the road shows, and I attended not all of them, but a lot of them, and I heard that resoundingly. And then housing, I think was another one, but that's a different issue. If there's anybody here that thinks that we are being tone deaf to our constituents, I really think we need to make sure we're paying attention to that.
I can make a comment.
Yes,
I
Mike.
agree. I agree, by the way, in regards to hearing a resounding about fire and water. I don't even question on that, So what I'm not advocating is being tone deaf. What I'm advocating is that we have really got to hear it across the board. So I'm finding that we go into one area and we hear one thing, we go in another area and we hear something different. But the fire and water, I have no problem with that. It is resounding across the board. And maybe I think Kate's right. I think that maybe for some other aspects of this, trying to align more with the state and be less restrictive, maybe not for this discussion, I don't know. But water and fire, no doubt about it, that's public safety, and we gotta listen to that. But the other part, I think that we need to make sure that we are a bit less restrictive, as what another large body has been talking to us about as well.
Do we have comments or questions from our other Citizens Advisory members? Marcus or Vicky? Okay. Any further yes.
Yes, I have one. I guess my concern is dealing with the being overly restrictive. I didn't even know if this template even existed. So thank you for pointing that out. And my concern in that is that, are we stopping people from using their land, even though everyone else around them is doing the same thing? Are we being restrictive where we don't have to be, only because, you know, is it beyond what the state is requiring? You know, so I'm concerned that, are we doing something like that by saying we're not going to use this at all? Because I think it's more important to be fair across the board, with keeping in line with what the state requirements and what the public is saying as far as fire, water. Because I agree with that wholeheartedly with the fire just down over the ridge from me, that we need to be attuned to that, but we still need to make sure we're being consistent with the individuals or the property owners. That's just a statement. I'm concerned about that, not saying we aren't going to use it simply because we decided to do it a number of years back.
Chair McIntyre,
Yes.
if I might just add, I just want to remind everyone that the goal of this work, the years and years we've spent on this work together, is not to pare us back to bare minimum state requirements. The goal of this work was to reach out to our residents and ask them what worked for them and what their concerns and needs were. And so in some cases, that means paring it down to the state minimum requirements. And in some cases, that means keeping some of the things that were very intentionally crafted a long time ago. And as Kelly mentioned, the history of this zone really is to reinforce the protections of the resources, which is our aquifers, right? Our recharge areas are largely these forest zones, not so much now, but historically, a large piece of our economy was based in our timber industry. So there are some reasons as to why there was very specific language crafted to protecting these resource lands from slowly being developed over time for non-forest uses. And as Kelly also mentioned, we didn't do a huge deep dive on this particular task because of the way things sort of ranked over time throughout this process. If we wanted to circle back and solicit more public feedback as a strategy, I think that would be a good idea. My concern is that based on the public feedback we did receive, and it should be highlighted that our public outreach is extremely farther reaching than most other jurisdictions' public outreach process is. So we heard from quite a few residents and we put quite a bit of information out there. I would hesitate to make big changes in policy direction now when we know that quite a few people are concerned about water resources and fire risk on those lands. So I just want to lob that out there. The original goal was not to get down to no rules or no regulations. The original goal was to find that middle ground that worked for our residents and supported their needs and reduced the threats to their personal property. So I'll leave that right there, but I just wanted to make sure we were all.
If I can tag on to that really quickly too, I want to clarify, we certainly did hear from a percentage of residents that they wanted less restrictions. But I want to be clear because it's been present in every outreach report that we've developed over the last several years, that we heard from an equal number of residents the desire for more regulations. A perfect example is we spent a lot of time talking about 160 acres in EFU. We actually heard from a huge contingent, a very vocal contingent in the Petersburg area, that 160 acres wasn't cutting the muster for dryland wheat, and that they would actually prefer us raising that minimum parcel size to 320 acres. So it's not, I think it's a generalization to say everybody in the county wanted less restriction. And I don't think it's fair or truthful to the feedback that we actually received from residents to characterize that feedback that way. I think it really, like a lot of things in land use planning, we're threading the needle to find really the balance between private property rights and what's considered, what the community determines as the public good. And so I think it's important to state that as many people as we heard, less restriction, we want less restriction. We heard an equal amount from folks wanting more restriction. And so we've had to make compromises along the way. And forest lands, again, I want to be very clear that we did have a few people wanting to see more development opportunities, but the vast majority of folks that we heard about forest lands was, we don't want to see more residential development because of the risks related to water and fire.
I'd like to just add something, if I may. I agree with you. I think too is that we live in a county that is extremely varied. We're one of the unique counties that, my gosh, you can go one edge and you're in the deep forest, you can go on the other edge and you're in the arid desert, So, and I can go down here in the valley and I'm going to hear one thing, and I head north and I hear a totally different, it's like a different place. So the problem is that I think Kelly is exactly right. We're threading carefully a needle, okay? But I do think that we should not compromise on safety, okay? And that's fire and water. I think that is critical for not only our short term, but also our long term. If that means that we need to move towards more restrictive areas to protect that, then we should do that, okay? I think we just need to really step back and try to listen and try to balance all this with not personal interest from individuals, but overall interest in safety and preservation. So I'm for it. I just want to have us pause a little bit to make sure that we're not overreacting into that case, because of over protecting things sometimes will backfire on you as well.
Okay. Thank you,
Yeah,
Mike.
and Mike, this is Kate, I share that concern because we do have to do the balance. We have to listen really carefully. So I agree. It may enrage some people, but I think it's overarching. We are doing for the whole, but we're also listening to the whole. I think that's going to get us there.
Okay, any further comments or questions from CAG members? If not, we'll.
I just have one thing. I'm not saying that I'm against restrictions. What I was trying to say was that if there's a tool and it makes sense to apply that tool, if it's in the toolbox, we should use it. But if the tool is in the toolbox and we're saying we're not going to use it, and it would be appropriate to apply, I don't know why we wouldn't apply it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, I think perhaps now we ought to hear from the people who've registered to comment from the public. I have a list of 4 people that have registered. Do we have any other ones, Kelly?
No, but if you've joined our call and would like to submit a comment, please go ahead and enter your name and address into the chat function, and we'll call you in the order that you enter your name.
So the first person that registered was Gabriel Watson. And I would ask that you limit your comments to about 3 minutes. Is Gabriel there?
Do we have to unmute or does, or do
Every
they-
individual has to unmute themselves. If they're on the phone, I believe it's, what is it, star
six.
6.
I don't see his name unless he's here by phone
Maybe
number.
on the phone.
Okay.
Maybe we can give him a minute and move
Okay.
on to the next person.
All right, then the next person, we'll circle back. Scott Edelman. Scott?
Hi, thank you for giving me a few minutes. I registered more in case any questions came up than make comments. So I don't have any specific comments for you regarding any of the proposals. I would like to say a few general things though. First, Kelly had mentioned that when the first work plan came to DLCD and LCDC, our leadership came back and said it was entirely too ambitious. That was true. But once they refined it and came back to us again, we just decided that it was entirely too ambitious still, but went forward with it. And I want to congratulate them, want to congratulate you and the community. What an outstanding job you've done. It's beyond what other counties did. And that's really what we saw when we said that. We'd not seen counties do something like this. They took it on. They have provided a model for other counties. And I have to be careful coming from DLCD, coming from the state, to complement a process, because I did this in Bend with the urban growth boundary. And the first person who stood up was a future county commissioner who said, the guy from DLCD said you did a good job. I don't think that's a good thing. And I understand there's a perspective like that. You don't necessarily want to follow the state, but this is not a state perspective necessarily. It's an observer's perspective who sees, there's a number of strengths in this. The introduction, for example, just looking at that's a how-to guide that other counties can use on how to do this the right way. Another real strength of all this, I think staff and you and the Planning Commission has done an outstanding job of linking state land use goals to local values. It's often seen as the state being the big brother in Oregon. And that's, I studied it in North Carolina graduate school about the state of Oregon land use program. It always seemed like a top-down process. I don't believe it's intended to be. I think there are broad state goals that are intended to be implemented at a local level with local values. And I think this plan, the proposals, does that. It very clearly ties state goals to what you want to see locally. And then another compliment I have for the whole thing is the clarity and readability. This is very tricky stuff, as you all know. But as you go through this document, it's really impressive how well it reads too. I would hope, I'm not a casual observer. It's been years since I was, but I still have confusing things. But I feel like it just does a really great job of being clear for the citizen who needs to read it. Whereas a lot of these documents are just full of jargon, and it's almost like you're trying just to get as much in there as you can without worrying about whether people read it. And it's just overall an outstanding job. And this, when they presented this to LCDC, the staff presented this as they want it to be a template for other counties to follow. And it's outstanding, and it will be just that when it's done. So I just want to compliment you, thank staff and you all for the great work that you've done.
Thank you, Scott. We really appreciate that. And yes, our staff has done an outstanding job, and we're really, really proud of their work and what we all as commissioners and citizens alike have contributed. So we're really excited about this process, and know it'll be a great tool for the whole county. So let's move to Nicole Chason. Is Nicole on?
I'm wondering if I should unmute. This is my first time helping co-host a Zoom call. Should I unmute all of the open phone lines and see if anyone?
We don't actually have the ability in Zoom to unmute anybody. They have to unmute themselves.
It gives me a button. Do you want me to try?
Yeah, try it.
I'm going to unmute all of, it's letting me. I've unmuted 3 phone numbers that I can't tell who they are. So
hello, this is Nicole Chason, 541-296-1514. And no, I do not have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. How about Lanny?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This
Go
is
ahead.
Lanny Mateer. Yes, this is Lanny Mateer at Antelope. I've put a couple of dozen questions out, sent them to the Planning Commission. They went as far as they wanted to with them, turned them over to the attorney. And the attorney recommended that I talk to the county commissioners. So at this point, I guess it's going to be in the hands of the county commissioners, and there'll be plenty of questions, and there's also going to be plenty of comments. I will say, however, that there's a tool you're talking about applying whatever tools you have available to do whatever you need to do to take control of the private property. Well, there's a tool that we have also to completely eliminate this whole process that's been going on for the last 43 years. And it's just been getting bigger and bigger, more people getting involved, more people trying to take control of the people who are paying the dues. Excuse me. And the tool that we have available, that the people have available, is called Article 1, Section 1 of the Oregon Constitution. I don't know if any of you have ever read it, so I'll read it to you. It says, natural rights inherent in the people. We declare that all men, when they form a social compact, are equal in right. That all power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. And they have at all times a right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. Well, these rules and regulations and laws and state laws and whatever you call them don't lend themselves to peace, safety, and happiness for the people who have been buying this property, working hard to hold on to it, trying to make a living on it, putting together something that they hope is a future for their children, and then find that it's being depreciated, their rights are being taken away from them, and they're losing everything in the process because of a bunch of bureaucrats down there coming up with a bunch of ideas they tell the county commissioners that they have to do because of state law. Well, I'm totally against everything you're doing, and my recommendation to the county commissioners is to completely eliminate the planning department of Wasco County. The rest of my comments I'll save for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Lanny.
You're welcome.
Gabriel. Is Gabriel there? Okay, I guess he's not there. Okay, at this time, I think I would like to close the public comment period, and perhaps we can have a motion.
Wait, Lynn, it looks like Sheila would like to comment.
Oh,
She's
I'm
waving,
sorry.
she's waving at us.
Yeah. Sorry.
Hi,
Yeah, I guess I wasn't signed up, and then today I thought I signed up to comment, but I guess I didn't. But I feel like there are a lot of people in the forest zone who would like to see the rules be more restrictive, because we really feel like it's endangering us when people, residences in the forest zone mean more fire risk, and a lot of the forest zone is not in a fire district. And let's see what else I'm gonna say here. And also, like, besides water and wildfire risk, there's also the third thing, concern with the roads. A lot of these roads are really impassable. They're private roads that have no fire truck access, that if fires start on some of these roads, I don't know how they'd ever put it out. And let's see, I want to say I support the proposed goal 4 changes as presented, as proposed, being consistent with current practice and add the wildfire recommendations. In regard to the template test, I was going to mention that I remember Don Baird a few years ago saying that when they looked at that, the effect of that in 1993, they thought it'd be a nightmare. And they looked at a 3-month period where they did an application period. She said it was just really a nightmare. That they need more services and things like electricity and fire protection. Last year, there's a group in the legislature that was convened by the House Committee on Agriculture and Land Use to study the template test because there were so many problems with it. They found they was being exploited by people adjusting lot lines, reshuffling deeds and property lines, reviving dormant zombie parcels, and manipulating the position of the template in order to qualify for additional dwellings. So they were trying to cheat the system and subvert the original intent of the statute. And it's not really, I feel like it's really not linked to any resource use. The template test, the concern is dwellings in areas of high fire risk. It was determined in 1997, Phil has left me a note. Yeah, we're 5 miles away from the current fire. Okay, thank you, Phil. In 1997, the Wasco County rejected using the template test. They felt it would not work well here. They had, we have many illegal dwellings. It'd be arbitrary. We have lots from the early 1900s that are part of larger tracts and in forest production. Although I did read that a tract now is for the template test is considered all contiguous lots under one ownership or one tract. Anyway, could I get one house? But anyway, and who would have this based on the January 1993 conditions, who would the burden of proof be on to show the legal lots and legal dwellings within the 160 acres? And if you found illegal dwellings, would these be removed? Otherwise, the message is why apply for a legal dwelling when you can just put one up? I think I would just kind of point to that, the illegal dwelling situation if you did this. And it would be based on the conditions existing in 1993, the lot lines and legal dwellings. Who would research that? After the Tulsa study, it was determined that based on the criteria in the statute for applying the template test, which included things like facilities and service capabilities of the area, that there would be a denial of all applications in the Tulsa area due to lack of road capacity and fire protection. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about that. Then on goal 5, if you remove the fencing standards, I hope you will make sure that you have handouts for new landowners, because I think people in the forest zone, it sounds like people in the ag zone don't like these fencing standards. I think in the forest zone, there are people who would voluntarily, comply with this if they knew about it. For goal 8, you talk about, for the implementation for policy 8.1.3, it talks about discouraging illegal recreational access through agricultural private lands. Or shouldn't this be all private lands? But maybe the problem is just mainly in the ag lands. Maybe that's why you have just ag lands. And I was wondering if hunting, is that considered a recreational use? It looks like it's not listed, but yeah, because we have a lot of problem with illegal hunting and trespassers, but yeah, and bicyclists on 7 Mile. But I don't know what you would ever do about 7 Mile, how you could ever fix that road, because it's so, I think it'd be really hard to try to do something with 7 Mile on the bicyclist. And a lot of it's the bicyclists, they don't stay in a line, they group together, but maybe that's an educational thing. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Kelly, did you have any comments on what Sheila mentioned?
Yeah, so on the project website, we've actively promoted some new apps that are available for hunters to know whether or not they're on public or private lands. And we'll continue to do all that kind of outreach and information spreading to really help reduce trespass. Again, we really heard the trespassing issues from agricultural folks. And I think this was also a carryover policy. So this was something that was in the existing comprehensive plan that we just carried over. And then again, strengthened by all that feedback we heard from agricultural operators that folks were parking or going to the bathroom or doing all sorts of like trespassing to take pictures or all sorts of things. So that's why we focused on agricultural lands, but always happy to promote outreach and education for residents and visitors to Wasco County about where the public lands are and how to avoid trespassing.
Thank you.
Lynn,
Yes.
I don't think there's any more public comment. I just wanted to pile on something that Sheila and Kelly just said, because oh, and by the way, Sheila, thanks for all that information. You are extraordinarily well informed, as always. So that was really helpful. Trespassing is a huge issue in the forest zone. And maybe people didn't make that clear, but we really should have, because not only is it a huge issue, but it's perhaps more dangerous, because those trespassers are potential sources of fire, and a fire in the forest zone is potentially harder to manage and more of a problem. So I totally agree that if it's about restricting trespassers moving on to resource lands, that we would want to also include forest.
Good point.
I am curious, is hunting considered recreation, or?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thanks.
Actually, our home, Wasco County, is home to all sorts of private reserves for upland bird hunting. So it's one of our specialty niche recreation opportunities that we have in Wasco County.
Okay. All right, if there's no further questions or comments from CAG members. Okay. I think it's the time that we need to have a recommendation from the CAG to the Planning Commission on all of the amendments and changes that you were presented with. Would anyone like to make that motion?
I would be happy to make the motion that we approve the document as presented, but I have no idea what all the modifications were. Yeah, I know there was a modification or a request to get clarification on non-motorized versus motorized. In that respect, that Kelly said she would go back and investigate. Other than that, I don't know if there was any others.
I believe the last one was to add an addition, policy 8.1.3, implementation strategy A, to add access through private agricultural lands and also add forest lands to that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other, do I have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. The amendments will be then taken up by the Planning Commission on September 1st. So that gives us another month to, if we think of something else in relation to what we were presented, to bring that up again at the September 1st hearing. Am I missing anything, Kelly?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make sure that everybody on the Citizens Advisory Group was aware that because we had to ask for an official extension for Work Task 18, we are required to send out that county-wide property owner notice. So typically it's been that scary postcard that we've sent out. We got a lot more information to share this time around, so we're sending a bifold that's got 2 sheets. One is going to be English and one is going to be in Spanish. It's because we've been alerted recently that we have an influx of Spanish-speaking populations around Pine Hollow and Wamakanae Valley. So we want to make sure that those citizens are engaged and involved. And we've also expanded that list to include all addresses. We've cross-referenced it to really bulk that up. So everybody should be receiving those notices sometime next week or the following week. At the request of chair, I always prepare a handout for current planners because they're usually the front line of dealing with public questions until they get directed to me. But I'm also going to prepare a similar handout for the Citizens Advisory Group Planning Commission and also for the Board of County Commissioners so that you feel comfortable responding to questions about that mailer because it's going to be a long and lengthy mailer. The mailer, again, is letting folks know about changes to these maps that we're proposing, changes to all the chapters. And we've also included a teaser about the upcoming land use and development ordinance updates and also the work that Will Smith is doing with the community wildfire protection plan. Finally, because we're amazingly, this is our last CAG meeting for Wasco County 2040. We're at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, of this very long and wonderful process. We wanted to celebrate all the work that's been done and really share with community members what the results are of this work. So we've included a bullet list that shows some of the highlights of all this work that we've done over the last several years. And so they'll be able to see in black and white highlights, our highlight reel, so to speak. So we're really excited for folks to get that. Again, it's going to be a bifold. It'll have in bold print that scary language that we're required by Oregon Revised Statutes 215503, which talks about the use and the value for property. So it always makes the heart race a little bit when you get that in the mail. But we're hoping that will increase participation next month. And again, I'm going to be sending you all a copy of that. So in addition to getting one in the mail, you also get a copy, advanced copy just to read, and then a handout so that you can share that information broadly when folks come to you and ask questions, because I know they do that. And then, as Lynn mentioned, next steps is to adopt all this in September, and then I'll be advancing, if it's approved, we'll be advancing to the board in October. Because this is such a huge packet, a lot of information, we have, I believe Jency's communicated with you that we're holding September 15th as a potential continuance date. And then I believe Angie may have some updates about possible hearings for the current planning program.
I'd just like to say one thing, if I may, is that Kelly and Angie, you guys did a heck of a job. You know, I mean, I'm blown away by your professionalism and what you have done. And it's going to be a kind of a baseline, whatever every county in this state's going to have to achieve. And so my hat's off to both you and what you've done and the leadership you've done and the toleration, just being tolerant to all of us who are not nearly as in the know as you guys are. And we depend upon you heavily. So my hearty thank you.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Our goal really is to make a plan that works for our residents. And we've tried our darndest to, as Kelly has said a few times, thread that needle. It's really hard to make everyone happy, but we're trying to listen with an open mind and consider the options and put those out there for everyone to provide feedback on. And it's been a lot of fun. Honestly, planners don't usually get to do this kind of work. So we both feel very privileged. I shouldn't speak for Kelly, but speaking for myself, I feel very privileged to be able to do this work. And I'm hopeful that as a county-wide community, there's a lot of opportunity in the strategies moving forward.
And I'd just like to express my sincere thanks to all of you for all the immense commitment as volunteers that you've made to this process and supporting staff and really rallying your communities to participate. Our community outreach, our participation levels have exceeded all expectations and really been a model for what can be achieved with multi-pronged strategies. And you really do all deserve such a huge round of applause for all that work. also, we couldn't have done it without the support of the Board of County Commissioners and county leadership and all the departments who have been really fundamental in helping us reach community members. And then of course, our citizen involvement. The citizens are a passionate, diverse, wonderful, engaged group of people that have made this process really, as Angie said, a pure professional joy to be engaged in. And it's been such a wonderful and just absolutely rewarding professional experience. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Angie, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about today?
You know, I have a laundry list of things going on that might be better shared by email, so I can summarize them for you more thoroughly. And any upcoming hearings not related to 2040 might also be more accurate in a few days as we firm up an appeal that we've got in hand. So
okay,
I'd prefer to do that by email if that's okay. I can share with you that the Gorge Commission's Gorge 2020 process is also wrapping up at this particular moment in time. It's kind of interesting that we're coming to a head on both of them at the same time. They are having some public meetings next week, Tuesday and Wednesday. If any of you are interested, they are also doing their meetings by Zoom, and you have to pre-register similar to this format. But if you're interested, it should be an interesting discussion about their final proposed revisions that they are preparing to have their final adoption hearing in September. So if anyone has any questions on that, feel free to follow up with me directly. But I'll prepare a summary for you all about upcoming hearing deadlines, and I shouldn't say deadlines, dates, upcoming dates of interest and other projects in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Well, I can't say that I'm sorry the CAG's last meeting is today, but I am joyful that it's moved forward so marvelously, and thanks to the great work of our staff and the CAG members who went out to all the meetings and helped to get people involved. But I'm looking forward to closing this chapter and start the whole implementation process. So we'll see that next year. So thank you all, and I guess meeting is adjourned.
Chair, I should say, I want to thank you all for pulling double duty